If you care about winning arguments, carry on the way you're carrying on. But if you care about arriving at the truth, you want to steel man, not straw man, the opposition. You want to help the other person create the best version of their argument so that together you can arrive at the truth. That's a culture of psychological safety. That's a kind of culture of generosity that aiming toward arriving at a better place mentally, spiritually, and just scientifically.
I'm Dr. Drew Ramsey, and I am here with another amazing guest to help me and to help you, help all of us think about mental fitness and how to get more of it in our life and how to construct it as a way to really take on the mental health epidemic. And so welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much. We've got Michael Muthukrishna. He's an associate professor of economic psychology at the London School of Economics, and he's an affiliate of the Developmental Economics Group. We've been talking just a little bit, and one way to describe him is an evolutionary biology, economist, computational science mashup. But Michael looks at how you think about culture using computer modeling, mathematical modeling, psychological concepts. And I wanted to have him on as we're really thinking about a cultural revolution here. We're thinking about a revolution of mental fitness, right? How can we do more than sit around with, not as bad, more awareness is good, but what can we do with our mental health awareness? And part of that is we have to shift our culture, our personal culture, how we think about mental health. And so, Michael, thank you so much for coming on all the way from London. It's a real treat to have you. You're on the eve, you're getting real close to your first book, a book launch. So, welcome.
That's right.
How are you doing?
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. Well, thanks
Talk about
so much.
an incredibly important topic. Yeah.
Well, first, let's talk about the incredibly important topic of your book, and maybe you just show if you got a copy of the book. You got a couple of covers,
I do. So we got two different covers. We have this one in the UK, and this one stateside. Yeah.
No, I like the UK one. It's like very psychedelic, very nice. Like the theory of everyone, and this is a play
theory
of
everyone. Yeah,
if I understand, on a very famous physics concept.
That's right. Yeah, theory of everything in physics, which is this grand unifying theory that pulls the world together. All of the forces suddenly make sense. Quantum mechanics and general relativity are under the same framework. And the book argues that is where we are in the human and social sciences, where we kind of have an overarching theoretical framework of the kind that's happened in other more mature sciences. Like we're moving from alchemy to chemistry, and more people should know about it because it affects every aspect of their lives.
Well, this sounds wonderful and hopeful and active. A lot of times when we think about social sciences, maybe we don't think about it as where we're going to find some of the solutions that we need right now. And it sounds like that's a little misguided. Things have shifted. But Michael, before we get into it, I just want to hear a little bit more about you. I'm sure everybody listening wants to hear a little bit because your personal history is so rich. Just as I got a copy of your book and I was reading through, the first thing I noticed where you start is with your personal biography. And so just as a psychiatrist, I have to ask you just to share a little bit about where you are right now, but also where you're from.
Yeah. So, I live in London, the United Kingdom. I've been here for, 6 or 7 years now. But yeah, my family's from Sri Lanka. I left when I was 2 years old, and I grew up in Botswana in South Africa, which is a really interesting time to be there. So it was actually just before apartheid ended, and Mandela was voted in. So it was like seeing that with front row tickets was amazing. Then I lived in Australia for a little bit, and then I lived in Papua New Guinea. And it happened to be during this major moment in their history known as the Sandline Affair, which was this insurrection. It was a coup. Then we lived in Australia. I moved to Canada, the United States, and now I live in the UK.
You open the book up with this coup, with this moment as you're a young, I guess, boy at this point, right? A young man, and you're watching these historic, violent events unfold. I think you had a family member that was injured in the blast.
Yeah. So there's by chance I've kind of experienced some interesting moments in history. I gotta say, my life has mostly been normal. But I've also had these moments. I was in London during the London bombings. I was in Sri Lanka during there was a 25-year civil conflict. But during one of those moments, a massive truck full of explosives was rammed into the central bank, and my grandmother worked across the road at a different bank, and she was injured. She survived. And yeah, these kinds of events I guess they got me thinking. They made me realize that first off, if you've lived in one place in the world, you take a lot for granted about how the world works, what people are like, and you don't realize just how different things are. But you also don't realize which parts of human behavior are also very similar.
Mm.
The way that we compete and cooperate with one another, but also incredibly different norms and what's acceptable and so on. And so I kind of wanted to understand all that. And in university, I decided I wanted to study psychology, human behavior. But I'm the kind of person who likes managing risks, so I wanted to combine that with something like medicine or law or engineering. And I went with engineering just because it was the most flexible of those careers.
You said, yeah, you get an international credential, which I liked. I remember thinking that way as a young man, like, I'm going to get licensed in America, but like, what if I want to live other places?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, my sister's a physician, and my brother's a lawyer. So I kind of, I can see how their careers have panned out. I think engineering is a nice degree in that you can just take it anywhere around the world, and it's well paid. But then I kind of had this crisis. I had this moment, as I was working, and I switched to kind of doing my degree part time, and I was just finishing it off, and I was like, is this what I want to do? Like, do I just want to make a bunch of money and then die? Like, is this what life's about? And so I figured, hey, look, I've got one life and I want to, leave the world a better place than I found it. And so initially I was applying cognitive psychology to engineering design in the context of smart homes and safety critical technology. So I worked in designing audio interfaces for anesthesiology. So it turns out, there are systematic mistakes that are made by anesthesiologists as a result of some sounds sounding like other sounds. And so we were redesigning those interfaces. And actually, it was changed in the end.
Like
Um,
propranolol and propofol?
well, more like, this is the heart rate, and this is like this is like the lungs or something, and those two sound they're related to each other, they're similar, and they shouldn't, because you don't know what you're supposed to act quickly enough. Um yeah, so these are the kind of systematic mistakes. There was a guy, I think it was Roy Patterson, who developed the interfaces. I don't want to dwell on that, but so I decided I wanted to go the other way. I wanted to take some of the tools from engineering and try to apply them to understand human behavior, and particularly norms and culture, better. So, I ended up working with this guy, Joe Henrich. He's now chair of human evolutionary biology at Harvard, but at the time he was cross appointed at the University of British Columbia in economics and psychology. And so I kind of cross trained in economics and psychology, took evolutionary biology, data science, really looking for tools to try to work on these problems of how humans operate. I did a postdoc at Harvard in human evolutionary biology, and then took up my current position. And I wrote the book because I think certainly when I started, but we had reached a point, not just my work, but the work of many people, that we cracked it. Like, we'd made that major breakthrough that allowed
Hmm.
us to understand human behavior and predict it mathematically in a way that was never possible in the past. And also think about cultural evolution. And a key insight, it's kind of like the periodic table. The moment that alchemy turned into chemistry was when we realized that the world was made up of elements, and these elements were related to each other in a very specific way that could be expressed by a periodic table. That realization in the human and social sciences is that human behavior isn't just a product of our neuroscience, like, isn't just a product of hardware, it's also software. So it is the stuff that you learn that is beyond your awareness and wasn't really created by anyone in particular, that you acquire from your society. So you got millions of years of genetic evolution creating your hardware that you get from your parents, and you got thousands of years of cultural evolution that you get from your societies. And humans marched across the globe, and we adapted to a variety of environments that normally require genetic evolution, but we did it culturally. Like, we figured out which foods we could eat and how to process them, and how to hunt the local predators and so on. And so, the fact that we could describe that, it completely shifts how you think about the world. It shifts how you think about the flexibility of things like mental health, what diets ought to look like, because we almost speciated it around cultural lines, not genetic.
Share a little bit. I'm curious where you began to first sort of see some of the mental health and mental health food connections that you're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, on mental health, there's this amazing. So, I think part of this. So this research, initially it emerged in the intersection of anthropology and evolutionary biology, and it was a bunch of mathematical models. But what really got people excited is the way in which those models started to interface with the data. So first off, there was data on climatic fluctuations that matched what the model said humans should arrive. So it's kind of this zone of intermediate environmental variation where your parents and grandparents had knowledge you should acquire. But the other thing was that we began to realize just how variable human behavior and psychology was around the world. So if you look at work like by Tanya Luhrmann, I don't know if you're familiar with this, she looks at the way that mental health uh, manifests and is dealt with in different societies around the world. And she looks at things like, schizophrenia. And what she finds is that in the West, like if I were to say to you, Drew, like right now, everything I'm saying to you, the voices in my head, they're telling me that's what's going on. The way you're going to treat me, you'd be like, who booked this guy?
I know some of this work that if you're based on the UK right now, especially because you're non-Caucasian, you'd be diagnosed with schizophrenia. And in the United States, at least per some of these studies that I'm familiar with, maybe not this one, you'd be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That there's a racial
Right.
and kind of cultural
Right.
bias. I mean, those are
Totally.
two different
Yeah.
things. But in terms of how we diagnose and prescribe, you see this
Yeah.
institutionally in America that depending on where you train,
Yeah.
the kind of medicine, I don't want to call it cocktail, but the combination of medicines that you use for agitation, it really varies. If you train in some institutions, you're like, oh, definitely we can give a little Clonopin and this and that. Other places like, oh, no, 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 no. We give a little Haldol and a little Ativan. And so there's a lot of, at least clinically in my experience, a lot of truth to what you're saying.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that totally aligns. I mean, the DSM, for example, is a collection of symptoms and a collection of behaviors. But if those behaviors are manifesting differently depending on your culture, you're going to get a lot of variability in diagnoses, right? As well as how you interpret what you're seeing. So it's not the case. Like there's human variation. You might think about something like schizophrenia as like hypermentalism. You're seeing minds where there aren't. You can almost think about like autism or autism spectrum disorders as maybe hypomentalism, like you're not seeing minds where you ought to. Um, but these kinds of things we see them around the world. But what happens is different. So in some societies, you might have these experiences, and you would be the shaman, right? You would be celebrated because it seems like you're in touch with something that other people are not. But even outside of these kind of small scale societies, the work came out of like Ghana and India, where people would recognize, okay, so you've got voices in your head. Maybe it's spirits, or maybe it's the ancestors talking to you. Let's think about that. Like let's listen. What are they saying to you, right?
Mm.
And if the thing, if it's comforting, if it's telling you should treat everyone a lot better, people are like, well, that's probably a grandparent or an ancestor talking to you, and that's good. You should listen to that. But if people have this, the voices in my head are telling me to harm myself or harm the people around me, people are like, that's a demon. That is someone who's trying to harm you from the past. You don't want to do that. And so because, the baseline is like, this is just a normal part of the world that, like the ancestors talk to us, the spirits talk to us, people's relationship with that and their health, if you like, in addition to the symptoms that they face, is very, very different. It doesn't separate them from society. They're just part of society. And what they're experiencing becomes part of who they are, and becomes part of what other people recognize as, okay, maybe there's something going on. Whereas of course those same symptoms in the Western world would be like, okay, you're scary, I don't want to be around you, I can't handle that. It's just interesting, right? It's interesting the way that the same physiology, the same etiology results in very different manifestations and a very different outcome for these patients, right? And that's mental health, but it applies across the board. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also one of those unfortunate and challenging parts that is we pathologize something, right? There aren't voices from the ancestor. This is a dopamine hypersensitivity. And if because and we know that in part because for a lot of people, the voices or, auditory hallucinations are one of the symptoms that can readily be controlled. And so, it is, I think, a challenge of how do we not create isolation with our diagnoses, and how do we not deny personal narrative. If you're someone with chronic auditory hallucinations, and that's a horrible symptom, and you've quote unquote failed many medication trials, and now we have this horrible thing when you really try to engage in treatment and we don't help you, we call you treatment resistant. And it's a really horrible term from I think a patient perspective of just I
Yeah.
don't hear the resistant. They're really trying a lot of different medicines and a lot of different treatments to engage with treatment. It's that we
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
sorted it out. I'm wondering in terms of some of when you talk about the shift that's happened, that we have the tools. There's some seminal moments and seminal tools it feels you've discovered around how we create personal culture and how social sciences understand this. Can you share a little bit what those are, Michael?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the things that I focus on are things like innovation, where you can think about how to construct your information environment, which is normally kind of passively. You're a passive recipient of algorithms deciding what to show you online, or maybe your
Brittany,
group friendship
they show
groups
me
based.
Brittany dancing these
They
days
show you a lot of
more than I
Brittany,
ever thought. It's like I
yeah,
have a totally
with
different
knives, with
relationship.
knives.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I think all of us in mental health, you feel like kinship with her. I don't know, kinship, like concern. You want to, yeah, see, that's what the algorithm and horses, a lot of horses and avalanche. It's intense. It's one of my favorite new diagnostic tools, Michael. I don't know whether anyone else is doing this. So there's like what we should name it. It's like the Ramsey assessment. And I ask patients to take a picture of their Instagram search page because it really shares something about what, at least when you're on social media, what your eyeballs and the algorithms are kind of telling us about your interest. But
That's great. No, that's great.
I don't want to
Well,
derail
so I mean,
us.
that's a great example because I mean, we have a mental health crisis around the world, and Instagram at least correlates with it. And from the perspective of a theory of everyone, what we have is a mismatch between the culture and the technology. So we learn how we should evaluate other people. We learn, the previous generation learned that if you were on TV or you had a nice typeface, then you were a source that was worth listening to. You were the New York Times, you were Walter Cronkite. And now, because it's easy for anyone to be on YouTube, or anyone to produce a New York Times looking typeface, the older generation is susceptible because their cues are out of date. And in the same way, we have cues to figure out who is a successful person that are not well adapted to a world where you can filter the moments in your life, because these are people you don't see every day, right? You don't see pictures of them sitting on the toilet, or when they fall over or make a mistake. You see their greatest moments. And literally the full force of technology is also filtering literally what they look like. And so, the young people don't yet have the kind of cultural technology to be like, hey, that's not real life. But they are adapting. Like the next generation, I think I would guess that Gen Alpha and beyond would be much more ready to understand that what they're seeing online, especially in a world, where we're entering right now with AI being able to produce content that looks pretty real, but also hallucinating a bunch of things that are not true. I'm hoping that culturally it leads to um, an understanding that the world is unreliable. People aren't always saying things that are in your best interest, and you should be more vigilant about these things. And there's good reason to think that this works.
AI, it's been so much about like aggregation and like how many, I don't know, how much content can you suddenly make with the power of AI and a lot of other things, I'm sure. But I hadn't really thought of it as you just mentioned that actually AI is going to be a verifier for us because there's so much information coming at us. It'll being able to filter out what is actually true and vet it, and it is going to be quite a premium thing soon. Michael, I feel like I cut you off in terms of thinking about the tools, sort of the new tools. One, it sounds like is innovation and our ability to think through and harness one of our greatest capacities as humans that I see all the time, and why I have a lot of hopefulness clinically when I meet people. Is just people are really creative, really resilient, um, really surprising. I love still. I've been a clinician so long. I'm still like people say things like, what I was really thinking about from last session. It's like, and what they tell you is like, wow, like
Right.
you're just like, that's not at all what I thought you would say. Or I was thinking about how to solve this issue, and I'm going to do it this way. And so innovation really speaks to me in terms of mental health, and also what I hope we're doing in whatever clinical endeavors and clinical work that our teams are involved with. It's just really, how do we like take, as you said, all the tools we have and make something new and better about mental health? So innovate is certainly one.
Yeah. So in the book I laid out is the compass framework for innovation, but it really emerges from this very simple idea that we used to think that innovations required innovators, right? Innovations were driven by clever people who come up with stuff. We now realize that innovations don't really require an innovator any more than your thoughts require a specific neuron. Like there is an innovator involved, there is a neuron involved. But what we're really seeing is ideas flowing through our social networks and recombining in particular people's heads. So think of, like calculus was invented by Newton and Leibniz. So you all have all this history, no calculus, and then two people come up with it at the same time. You know, that's crazy. Like what's actually happening is they are reading the same material. They are, recombining and coming up with similar thoughts. As scientists, as physicians, as entrepreneurs, we we live in this weird paradox where we think we are geniuses who see ahead and, of other people, but we're also terribly afraid of being scooped or beaten to market. Somehow both of those things are true, and I think it's because at an implicit level we recognize that we are exposed to the same things. Our ideas do come from this kind of social milieu. So what that means is you can be more direct. You can be more, deliberate about how you become a more creative, innovative person. And you could do that by deliberately seeking out information from your weak links, the people who you already know what your friends think. You don't know what, that person you met at the bar years ago, the person you, went to high school with who's gone on down a different path. You don't know what they think. And you certainly don't know what people you disagree with, but who are very clever people otherwise think. And so exposing yourself and recognizing that the solutions to your problems are in other people's heads, but they're spread across multiple heads. And what you have to do, and I describe it as the magpie strategy, because in folklore, magpies go around, they look for shiny objects, and they bring it back to their nest. So you do this, you go and you're looking for all those pieces. You engage in what I also call intellectual arbitrage. You're looking for the solutions that exist in other disciplines, in other industries, in other people's heads, and bringing it back to solve your problem. But the first step to that is understanding, having a prepared mind that really understands yourself and understands the problem that you're facing. Because only then will you see the solution where others see noise, right?
Tell me about preparing the mind, because this sounds very much like the mental fitness revolution in terms of us spending as much time as we do on great biceps and calorie counting and other aspects of fitness. But maybe I don't mean to sound disparaging about this, but really spend as much time, I'd say more time and focus on our mind and our inner workings.
Yeah. So for technological innovation, the prepared mind is really about knowing the solution, but it's completely analogous to what I'm about to say. So I'll just give you a quick example of this. So Charles Goodyear, the inventor of vulcanized rubber, famously discovered it because he burned a piece of rubber and he realized when you scrape away the burnt bit, you get a vulcanized piece that is harder and is suitable for tires. Now, lots of people probably burned rubber, but the reason that he could see that as a solution is that he'd previously tried to work for the India Roxbury Rubber Company. And when he was there, he saw all these misshapen rubber products and he knew that there was this problem. And so when he saw this vulcanized rubber, he was like, aha, I've got the solution. And, he was able to innovate in that way. When it comes to mental health, again, we have to have a prepared mind to understand ourselves really well. So I tell, one of my colleagues, Paul Dolan, he works on, happiness and well-being. He has a really nice way of putting it. He says, people differ in what satisfies them and makes them happy. And, we know from the evolutionary literature that evolution doesn't want you to be happy, actually. It doesn't want you to be satisfied. Happy and satisfied animals don't do much, they're content. Evolution wants you to be slightly dissatisfied so that you're continually going out. So, generally, what our policies want to do is minimize misery. But also, if you want to find something that satisfies you, you have to think, am I a person who cares about purpose or pleasure? Right? And where do I lie on that?
I like both purpose and pleasure a lot, and
You
I'm
can, of
glad to
course,
hear.
like both. Of course.
Well, I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
evolutionarily I'm doing something, because I wouldn't say I'm dissatisfied, but especially as I'm aging and as I speak, I'm really blessed to get to speak with a lot of young people who keep me hip and ish, and a lot of folks who are older than I am clinically, who are thinking about life, thinking about productivity and what sort of it all amounts to, what it all means, and so there is this real need for pleasure and for purpose and for productivity, all kind of in one, that people really struggle with.
Well, if you want to read more about that, Randy Nesse has this great book called Good Reasons for Bad Feelings. And it's about, how anxiety, generalized anxiety, depression and so on are at higher rates in the modern world because they're kind of mismatched. Evolution is trying to get you to slow down or is trying to get you to be more vigilant, and the world isn't responding to that. And so you get, higher rates. And this is a clinical pathway. He's a psychiatrist. It's a pathway for treatment. But I don't want to get it. So what you're describing is, in us, there are many, like each of us have different people inside us. And if you want to be satisfied, you have to satisfy those different people, right? There's like, for some people, there's the actor, I want to be on stage. I want everybody looking at me. I'm the celebrity. For others, there's the poet. You might also have the poet in you. I want times alone where I'm thinking through my thoughts and I'm writing down this deep revelations. There's the me, the friend, me, the husband, me, the father, different aspects of you. And if you want to be a satisfied person, you need to satisfy all of those different aspects of you. So you got to look at your life and say, when are the moments that I had flow, when I felt like I was in the right place right now? And how do you try to maximize those moments in your life? How do you construct your life where you have more of those moments and less of the moments that, made you feel miserable?
Michael, I'm just want a little, since I'm getting a consult here about my evolutionary circuitry. Now, I'm feeling that most in an evolutionary mismatch place that's confusing me psychospiritually. I'm feeling that the most on the back of a very specific horse at a canter. And it's a type of flow state. It's hard for me to explain, but I feel a complete merger. I'm not aware that there's a separation, and I feel lost in space and time. But the more I pursue that, it feels. I mean, it's teaching me something, but it feels like it's kind of not putting me in the modern world.
Yeah, but I mean that's that's what I meant about you have to satisfy the different parts of yourself, right? If you only satisfy that, first off, pursuing it might not be the right word. My collaborator Ted Slingerland, he has this book called "Trying Not to Try." The flow state is almost where you're not trying. When you pursue it, it's out of reach. But it's not the only aspect of you, Drew. Like there's other aspects of you, right? You, the clinician, you, the, I don't know your personal circumstances, but maybe you, the partner, or you, the father, or you, the businessman, you, the podcaster. There's different parts of you. And if you only satisfy the one where you're at a canter, you're right. You're going to disconnect yourself. You're doing the monk aspect of you.
Mm.
But there's different parts of you. There's different parts of you, and they're different on purpose and pleasure. And for each of us, it's different. There isn't a one size fits all, right?
That mental preparedness you're speaking about, can you is that sort of in that when you're thinking about knowing these aspects of the self, understanding that none of them can fully dominate, right? That actually, if I'm getting into a little flow state a few times a week and really, trying to just witness that, it's going to maybe inform these other pieces and but it can't dominate. Can you talk a little? So, one aspect of mental preparedness is a kind of know thyself. Are there some other pieces that are really kind of stand out to you in your work?
Right. So after you know thyself, that's how when you start to construct that information environment, as I said, you think about, we are social, but different, we differ in how much we need to be social. Who am I surrounded by? Are these people who are on my team? Are these people who are, what we want are people who feel like they are in a positive sum situation with you and not a zero sum. There are leaders who are in that state, who feel great pleasure when when their mentees run and they run faster. And when you're the coach, you're the person who put. There are leaders like that. Then there are leaders who feel like when that happens, you got to pull them back because they make you feel bad. The former are the positive sum relationships. The latter are the zero sum relationships. And what you want are more of those positive sum. You want a spouse who you both win when you both succeed. You want friends who you both win when you both succeed. You want leaders, you want bosses, you want colleagues, you want your environment to be filled with these win-win situations. And in all we do, we should be looking for those win-wins. How do I construct this situation so that you win and I win? Because if I'm winning, right? Maybe I don't feel bad about that, but I'm creating a worse world, and in the end it comes back. It comes back.
This win-win, I'm just having a little. This is one of my dad's favorite phrases. I'd say the win-win solution. And I have to say, as a younger man, I found it a little frustrating at times, just because it felt like not that I wanted one side to win or that people needed to be dominated, but it felt a little, I'd say, inefficient. That sometimes, and it felt like a lot of times with the harder solutions or harder kind of problems that the world's facing, it was hard for me to even kind of conceive or construct of win-win solutions, and it felt sometimes a little, I don't know, hard to actually conceive of.
I mean that it is super hard to find win-wins, but they are They are inefficient in the sense, so, one of the areas I work on is cooperation. How do we end up in a world where we cooperate at a scale that we've never cooperated before?
Love it. Love
It
it.
is an alignment in our values. It's an alignment where the level of I call it the law of cooperation in the book. The level of cooperation that is optimal is the level at which my returns for this project, for this business, for this paper I'm writing is higher, right, than it would be if I were working in a smaller group because I wouldn't achieve what I needed to achieve, and also higher than if I were working in a larger group because my returns would be too distributed. The win-win is finding that point, and it's incredibly hard. And the two mistakes that people make are, one is they give too much away. They want to create a world where others are always winning, right? And yet they think eventually that comes back.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you are not obliged to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, right? You that in a world where people are always taking for you, there won't be much left. And in a world where you're always taking
I
from
hope
you.
everybody listening is really hearing this. In clinical world, we use this all the time about boundaries, almost to the point that it kind of, I think people think it's a little cliche, but this is such a good example that boundaries are around preserving of the self, right? That if you are always in service, always giving, I mean, service and giving are amazing. Like the world runs on that. But you can't constantly be taking from the well without setting a boundary to replenish. So, Michael, thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out, and I didn't mean to interrupt. As you're saying,
That's
within a
okay.
boundary line,
Yeah.
making sure it sounds like to invest in others and contribute.
Yeah, that's right. And just, I mean, the key is simply, it is really, I know it's cliche, but it is the win-win. Like, the business partners, when the business succeeds, they get their share, you get your, that's the business partners you want, not the ones who are like, if I can push this guy out, I can actually still succeed. I don't need this person. I can still succeed, and then I'll have more. Right? It's the same in a project.
It's a way that in the research and work you've done that we can better spot people who are those types of partners for us, people who want to find win-wins. What do they look like?
So you what I call, I call it incentive audits. You try to audit someone else's incentives, right? You're trying to say, like, if you scratch under the surface of most people's beliefs, you will find self-serving incentives, right? Like, it's not a surprise that, academics talk about meritocracy, or, if you're wealthier, you care more about lowering taxes or something like that, right? Like, if you scratch under the surface, most people have these. So what you want to do is find someone whose incentives are aligned with your incentives, where even when they are working in their own self-interest, they need you. Your comparative advantage, what you bring to the marriage, what you bring to the friendship, what you bring to the project team, to the business, to the any interaction, is valuable to them for their incentives, for whatever drives them. I mean, another mistake that people make is to assume that what drives other people is what drives them. And, it's not. It's not the case. Everyone has different needs and wants and goals. And so, as much as you know thyself, you should also need to know the other person and know what is driving them, and then make sure there's alignment.
And also, it sounds like address our biases. I think this really struck me clinically early on, where I had this bias that people's inner worlds worked a little, kind of like mine did. And that's
Yeah.
somewhat true for the most part. We like connection and attachment. We feel good when we're praised.
Right.
Like people like spaghetti and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
meatballs.
Those are universal. Yeah.
There's some truth
Well,
there, but
yeah.
but it was a real, I would say, smack in the face clinically, that to truly sit with people and be a great psychiatrist was to really see and appreciate the ways that people's minds worked very differently than mine, and that they had.
That's right. So this takes us back right to the beginning, which is that we have different software. We're running different operating systems. There are commonalities. We all have the mouse and the keyboard and the whatever, but we have these deep differences, right? And we can't see them. One of the things about the implicit bias literature and it doesn't work. It actually doesn't work. Sometimes it makes things worse. What How it works, how we get past our biases, is when we are incentivized to find each other's biases. Because when you look at someone else's relationship, you can see it. You can be like, it's so obvious what the problem is, right? But it's hard to see in yourself. And when we're in an environment where we feel comfortable from a place of, like, we're just trying to help each other here, that's when we make, like, scientists, like, look at I'm a scientist, right? not for a second do I believe that scientists change their minds and reverse everything in the face of good evidence. We're just people at the end of the day. But science still works because we are all incentivized to show each other that they're wrong, that other people are wrong. And young scientists are watching and they can see we have a basis of evidence and they're deciding who the winners and losers are. And as a result, we slowly converge on the truth, not as individual scientists doing experiments, but as a community of scientists who behave and participate in this way.
I love this. I love this way you illustrated earlier, and you do again here, that how truth comes from a collective shared experience. It doesn't live within a person. It's really been my experience clinically. We have a new clinic here in Jackson, Spruce Mental Health, and so I'm collaborating with people who are in medicine, but in different ways. One of our team members is a spiritual director who is an Episcopalian priest. Another is an ER doctor. ER docs and psychiatrists were really different. We're aligned by this commitment to mental health, or as one of our team members put it, raising human consciousness around mental health and mental fitness. And so the kind of solutions and associations in the process, the truth of the process, it now lives in in many minds, and it's been really
That's right.
wonderful watching it bounce around. It reminds me a little bit of nutritional psychiatry that started with just a
Mhm.
couple of us, and now there's a whole
Yeah.
movement of people thinking about it, talking about it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Michael, we're going to run out of time, but I have to ask a couple questions. The first one, I want to hear your spontaneous thoughts on what it would take or what it would look like for us to have a collaborative culture of mental fitness.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, a lot of this is as individuals, it is about constructing your personal environment. And, I've discussed enough of that already, I think.
Well, I want to hear what pops to the top of your head of construct your personal environment
Oh, okay.
with what? Like more
Yeah, I mean, it's
avocados,
about,
more like
it's
stretching?
no, I mean, it's about finding those win-win, the people who have aligned incentives and, finding the people who I disagree with for sources of information and so on. But there's also a broader cultural phenomenon, excuse me, which is that, it's easier to be nice when there's more to go around, right? The other reason that we want others to win, I say to my students, I say, you are not in competition with one another. We don't curve you. We don't grade you on a curve. It's unlikely, but it's possible that you could all get distinctions. It's very unlikely just because the exam is hard and people tend to, end up in a
And
distribution.
we're the London
The
School of
people around you,
Economics. Sorry.
that's right. We don't mess around here. But these are your future networks. These are your future, what's happening over at that other bank. These are your future collective brain. So nurture them, help them grow.
Biggest part that I would emphasize, anybody at any point in your professional career. This happened to me in my 40s, actually. I just realized, like, the set of mentors I had going through in training, wonderful. But there were new questions I was asking, and I kept kind of almost being a little disappointed. Like, why don't they know about this or that? And I needed a new set of mentors and kind of to tap into my network in a different way. And especially as I've being professional for a little while now, that definitely is the most pleasurable part. Like when I'm working with young folks and they're struggling and at a hospital or at a bank or somewhere, say,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
who are you connecting with? Who are you on a first name basis with? Who? Because there's nothing like checking in with those
Yeah,
folks that you knew 10, 20, 15 years ago, the people who you had an
yeah,
office next to them in the very first time
yeah,
you had an
yeah. You'll learn
office.
something new. Yeah.
And I'm sort of go on and on, Michael. I also love this idea, and just to emphasize it, that because it's so hard, that the way to really understand and refine your ideas and find more truth is to go to the clearest, smartest, most adamant acolyte of the opposite idea. Right? If
Yes,
I
exactly.
believe in
It
veganism, I need to go
Right.
talk to carnivores. If I
Exactly, exactly, you got it. I mean, create as much as you can an environment of psychological safety where there is people feel free to speak their minds. The world is complicated, right? We don't always know how it works. People, things change. Create an environment where people are free to say what they really think, right? In an environment of psychological safety, and you'll learn something. In the book I describe it as steel manning. Like if you care about winning arguments, carry on the way you're carrying on. But if you care about arriving at the truth, you want to steel man, not straw man, the opposition. You want to help the other person create the best version of their argument so that together you can arrive at the truth, right? That's a culture of psychological safety. That's a kind of culture of generosity that is aiming toward arriving at a better place mentally, spiritually, and just scientifically.
It's just been it kind of for me clarifies why I'm so upset with politics right now. It's that I thought politics was supposed to be a little bit boring in the sense that you come up with somewhat boring solutions to really complicated human problems, right? We've got people who feel all kinds of different ways about this. Here's a way we're going to do our best to support this process, or that everyone has an equal right to this opinion, and it doesn't feel like it functions that way, like as a keel, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like that's the job
Yeah.
description anyone got. It's about domination
Yeah.
and power
And
and
increasingly so,
defeatists.
yeah.
So I really I
There's a
appreciate
sorry,
your.
Arthur C. Clarke. Sorry to read, like Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction author. He had this really nice line about politics. He said, "Anybody who wants to be in politics, anyone who wants to be the president, should automatically be banned. We should be dragging the right person kicking and screaming into the job. It's almost like jury duty. Like we want the right person to be like dragged into the job because they're going to do a good job and they're going to serve their time. And anyone who wants it, you should be a little suspicious of." I like that.
An idea I heard recently I liked a lot is that there should be specific training for it, in the sense that just so much of our hope and our future really rests on government being effective and compassionate and efficient. And it's just striking to me how much time I had to train to work on one person's mental health. So the idea that folks who are constructing a mental health system and funding it haven't had to kind of
I should know
sit
a
with
little
what's
something
gone
about
right and what's
mental
gone
health.
wrong, and
Yeah.
and just about how do you construct systems. Michael, I don't want to deviate too much just from a couple questions around your mental fitness and some things that you do. You come from a lot of different places. You've lived all over the world. You're a professor in your 30s. I'm just wondering, what's the kind of daily routine of mental fitness look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, so everything I've said, I practice. My time is spent. I got 3 kids. I have the morning shift and I have the evening shift. My wife takes the daytime, and we're lucky that we have flexibility in our careers in order to be able to do that. Um, I think about balance a lot, like in terms of like how do I efficiently, like you see in the book, I'm kind of obsessed with like how do I not over optimize because you got to be optimal about that too, but how do I allocate the amount of time, the amount of space, and the amount of myself to be a good spouse, to be a good father, and to be a good scientist, be a good entrepreneur? How do I do that?
I
And
want
I
to
do
just hear.
things
I want
like,
to hear
you know,
the living proof of this,
yeah,
Michael.
practically, yeah. So
I want to hear your breakfast routine. You got 3 kids.
yeah.
You're the no. I mean, like the proof is in the pudding.
Breakfast is always fun.
Well,
Breakfast is always fun.
tell me, how do you
We
do this?
always
Tell me all about what is the.
I love so for me, like I love to cook, right? Because like my world is so like rigorous and scientific that cooking is like this moment where I can be creative and I can create things. I mean, we eat food from all around the world just because that's how I grew up. Tamago kake gohan, which is a Japanese rice egg thing. Kids love it. It's an example of what I made yesterday. Um, but I do other things, so like I do use like float tanks, like isolation chambers as a cheat code to meditation. I find this is like a super quick way to kind of get into the zone. So I don't know if all your listeners are familiar with these, but you're in a tank. It's completely dark, but I'm generally claustrophobic, but you don't feel claustrophobic. It feels like you're floating in space. You're in Epsom salted water, like your personal Dead Sea, that is at body temperature, so you don't feel it. You got earplugs in, so you have no senses. And when you don't have senses, when you have no sensory input, as you do in the rest of the day, your mind starts to organize itself because it can only turn inward. And it starts to organize itself and figure things out. And it's like a cheat code to meditation. I lift weights, like I stress my body. If my mind is stressed, I actually stress my body. And if my body is stressed, I do something with my mind. Right. There's lots of things. I talk about Aufguss ceremonies, which I encountered here in Europe, which is these, in a sauna master is like beating this air around. It's like 145 Fahrenheit. It's like, it's intense, but it's like you will sleep like you've never slept before after one of these. I do those like a few times a year, at least once a year. I've just, what you need to do, I would say to listeners, find the thing that works for you, that efficiently puts you into the state and allows you to continue to achieve your goals. and always be on the lookout for that. Try new things. You don't know what'll work for you. But once you do, put it into your routine. Make it a habit. Make it part of who you are.
I appreciate that so much,
Do you
Michael.
want to know more, Drew?
I think it's great advice. I do. I think a day in the life of your mental fitness. I definitely want to come to breakfast with you and your kids sometimes, Michael. If I'm in the UK, I'm going to knock
You're
on your
welcome
door
to.
because
You're
it sounds
welcome
like breakfast. It's always fun with dad and 3 kids. I mean, that's a whole book right there in and of itself. Everyone, check out Michael. Michael, you got the book. Hold it up again. Check out Michael's new book. We'll
I
post
sure
all
will.
the links.
Theory of
And
Everyone.
the theory of everyone, as you can hear, he's got lots and lots of ideas and really, I think, great personal tips on how we think about, test out our ideas, the real importance of checking in with our biases of who we are, what our incentives are, who other people are and their incentives. I really appreciate this conversation, and I wish you all the luck with your book. Everyone, as usual, the whole point of this conversation is to help you take tips and ideas from it and work on your mental fitness in some way, to do something from this conversation, to get inspired by some line, some idea, whether it was a recent episode we were talking about snacking turnips. Have you ever heard of snacking turnips, Michael? We got snacking turnips
No, I
from a
haven't.
farmer
No.
a couple episodes ago. Yeah, it's like, wow, what a tip. What really sticks with
I want
us
to know more
from
about that.
Michael's idea, but the one that really strikes me is the way that there's something about our human process that just really lights up in groups and in community, and that speaks so
Yeah.
much to such
We
a
are a
key
fundamentally
part.
social species.
We are so social and such a key part to our mental health and mental fitness that we have to keep up. So everyone, thank you so much for your time and your attention. Michael, thank you so much for all your thoughts and all your work. Everyone, I'll see you in the next episode.
pleasure.
Take care.